Energia, which is a network of experts around the world who are focused on gender and sustainable energy issues. And we are a member of the Global Gender and Climate Alliance and also a member of the Women's Steering Committee for the Rio Plus 20 conference. So we didn't have a PowerPoint opportunity today, so actually we're passing out some information because I want to talk about some projects, and so I wanted you to be able to see some the websites and the information. But I just want to talk a little bit about what Eleanor was saying. One of the themes of Rio Plus 20 is the green economy. And it's a kind of confusing thing because we've been talking about sustainable development for a long time, and it's not clear what it means now to shift to talking about a green economy. Because there are three pillars of sustainable development, which were economic development, environmental protection, and social equity. And in our, as part of the steering committee for Rio Plus 20 planning, Energy has been working with the other women and the other organizations represented, including you, on trying to come up with some kind of perspective on what's a women's view on what the green economy should be. And so one of the first things that we were talking about is that a green economic system can't just be focused on environmental protection and economic development. It has to include the social equity piece of it, including gender equity and environmental justice. So that's something that we're struggling with, to see how does that fit into this concept? What is a green economy? One of the things that we wanted to highlight in our discussion is that women are already involved in sustainable development activities throughout the world, at all levels of the economy, providing basic necessities for their families. They're forest stewards, they're farmers, they're land managers, community leaders, researchers, political leaders, technology designers, entrepreneurs. And yet, due to societal gender inequalities, there in many countries and in many contexts, women's skills and their contributions remain unrecognized and undervalued. And we're hoping to, through the Rio Plus 20 process, to call attention to women's contributions, and also in the context of the climate change treaty, to try to channel attention towards women's contributions to the green economy, to a transition to sustainable development, and to use also some of the funding that's supposed to go towards mitigation and adaptation into women's projects. So through Energia, we've been looking at what kinds of things women are already working on, and then what kinds of support that they need for their projects, for their activities, and how to try to get that through these, at least call attention to it, to the need for investment, for the need for training, for resources, through these international processes. So the focus of Energia is on gender and energy, which is always difficult to try to explain. Why is that important? Why is that our entry point? And one of the things that we've been doing research on and looking at is the fact that women are, in many developing countries, the ones who are collecting fuel, who are managing the energy sector. That in a lot of places, most of the energy comes from women collecting firewood or agricultural residues or dung or whatever they're using for cooking, for heating, for lighting. There aren't modern energy sources. And this is a big factor in limiting women's opportunities. One, it's women's roles to do this is something that's a societal factor. But nevertheless, these are traditional women's roles to go collect the wood, to get the water, to grow the food for the family, to process it by hand. all without electricity or motorized power. And this is a critical issue in developing countries. It's a little bit hard for people in New York sometimes to understand, what that would mean. But if you had to start every morning and go get the wood and get the water and cook everything and prepare, the food without any kind of equipment, just whatever you can find in a rural village. So it's kind of an embarrassment, though, to a lot of countries that their energy sector is dominated by these rural illiterate women who are gathering wood. And so whenever there's an opportunity to get resources for energy development, it's usually for urban areas, for transportation, for industrialization, and women's labor isn't valued, so there's very little attention paid to what's going on in these villages. So Energia has representatives in 22 different countries, and it's focal points who look at projects, try to give support to the kinds of small-scale projects, and also to work with the national governments to try to interject a gender component into the kinds of plans that they make about energy and also about development. And what we found is that there are a number of ways that women's roles can be transformed through modern energy services to allow them to run businesses and also to play an important role in the transition to greener kind of energy services, low carbon technologies, if they get the kind of training and support they need to develop cleaner cook stoves, there are projects where women are putting together solar panels, installing them, maintaining them, and we're trying to promote this kind of engagement of women. So some of the projects one of the projects that I first started working in connection with as a UNDP project is the multifunctional platform, which is an interesting thing because it's a simple diesel engine, but you can run a lot of different equipment and use it for village power. It's a kind of a mini generator, you can attach equipment to it. There's been a lot of investigation to see whether women can grow their own fuel in rural villages to run it off plant oil or biodiesel. And that's something that's been scaled up, and it's now in 7 different countries in Africa. And it's been a really interesting experiment because it's the women's organizations that own and operate these systems. And they're trained, they may be illiterate, but they've been trained to run and manage it as a business and to sell the services. Another project I've looked at for a long time is one of Energia's members from Ghana, Gratis, and actually Sabina from Ghana is here, who's involved in this project. And this was also a project of growing fuel using jatropha and then using it in shea butter processing. Gratis is an organization that disseminates technologies for use in rural villages in Ghana. And it's been effective in doing that and creating new entrepreneurial possibilities for women. Another Energia member has been working in an urban context in the Philippines and providing food vendors with more efficient stoves that run on charcoal rather than wood with less smoke, and also setting up solar panels so that there's lighting for the early morning and the evening hours. Energia has been providing some guidance into gender issues for at a national level in Nepal for the biogas program, also in Pakistan. These are things that are much broader scale, not the little tiny village projects, because we're trying to get this mainstream, to have the attention to women's issues, be something that's done on a broader scale. And one of the things that's been really interesting is the development of information technology. If you can have solar power for your radio, in micro hydro in Nepal, they're using them in TVs. Women get access to communications equipment, also to television and radio to get information about local politics and news, but also seeing women in different roles than just in the rural village. And it has a very empowering impact. Also, mobile phones have been a big deal. So there are these things, that little pieces of equipment that have a solar charger. There's a lantern. You can charge your cell phone rather than having to go somewhere to someplace to plug it in. And that's kind of been a real important way for women to be able to communicate and get information. But it's hard to get that if you don't have electricity. There's a woman in Uganda who's been trying to get Energia to help figure out how to communicate. We can't communicate with her because she can't get her email because she has to go to the next village, and it's just very difficult. But she's a woman who's been a spokesperson about the impacts of climate change because her village was flooded. It suffered from drought and flooding, and they didn't know why. And then she was actually spoke in Cancun at the climate conference talking about, they found out about this climate change issue and they're very upset about it. So anyway, we're trying to figure out how to get opportunities for women to be organizing using the internet as well. So and also training women for the kinds of both as leaders and technology. So on this paper, I have made some policy recommendations that I just want to share with you. What's really important is to get women involved in the decision-making processes. And that's something that's, because of women's roles, particularly women who aren't that particularly educated, it's difficult to be able to say, our needs are important, particularly in a culture where they're not necessarily valued. So it's important to, where there's opportunities to support women's participation, to use these international processes to try to engage national governments and saying, look, you really need to think about women's issues. This is important for your economy as well as for human rights and equity issues. And there are ways to do gender mainstreaming. Energia has worked with a number of governments, and it seems like if you kind of draw attention to it, people understand that something that they thought was gender neutral actually turns out to have bad impacts on women that they hadn't thought about. Then they're likely to take that into account. It's more likely than if they didn't think about it at all. So gender audits and collection of data is really important for that. And then incorporating that into their overall development policies. And then providing innovative financing and training for women. And this is where we're trying to focus for Energia in the climate context, is that there's supposed to be a great deal of money that's going to go into developing countries for mitigation, for green technologies, for adaptation. Women are already working to adapt to climate change, and they could really use some recognition and support for that. So thank you for this opportunity. Very thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gail, for that. I think you made a good point that not only is technology important, but the training. So women are able to use and develop the technology and scale it up. And the other important point is that often policymakers don't realize a policy is not actually gender neutral. And coming with the data to back that up can have a great influence on new policymaking. That shows that it would not only benefit their economy, but would also just reach out and work with the human rights perspective that we all advocate. So as we move on from the local to Rio, our next stage is Lucy Wanjiru, who's a program specialist on gender and environment with the UNDP gender team. And she's also a GPCA member, and we're happy to have her here.
Thank you, Edna. As heard, I'm Lucy. I'm working with the UNDP gender team. I work in the environment cluster. Is that any better? Yes. Okay. So I'm working in the environment and energy cluster within the UNDP gender team. And our main task is to mainstream gender in environment and climate change projects and programs and policy in UNDP, and also to design and develop innovative projects and programs that can input to the and support gender mainstreaming and women's empowerment. So I'd like to, when I was thinking about this presentation on sustainable development as we move to Rio, I thought I should start this presentation with a personal story of one of my experiences that I had in my first jobs when I left university back in my country in Kenya, which is a story that really illustrates that for sustainable human development, we really need to have a participatory approach, which means that we engage the social and gender issues, which means that as we plan our projects and programs, however technical they are, we always need to remember that we are planning them for people, for communities, and communities are not homogeneous. Communities are made of men and women, and we need to plan and having this in our minds and also integrating these issues in our planning. I started off working in a water and sanitation project, this in my career. It may be over 15 years ago. And I went to this project. It was a water and sanitation project in a very dry and arid area. The project was implemented by the government of Kenya with funds from SIDA. Indeed, it was a huge project, a multi-million-dollar project, because the government had looked at this region and seen that there were frequent droughts and people were suffering. Women had to walk many kilometers to fetch water. As a result, the water they were using was contaminated, and there was frequency of diseases, waterborne diseases, even cholera. And when they looked at this area with support of the donors, they saw the need to provide clean water in this region. And so what they did, they consulted the engineers, the water engineers, and they went and surveyed, and the geologists, and they found they could get groundwater in the region. And they started drilling. And they equipped the boreholes with hand pumps, and they expected the communities to use the water. And 10 years down the line, nobody was using the water. And when the hand pumps broke down, nobody repaired them. And it was at this stage that I was lucky to join this project as part of the community development and training with a team that was looking at the social issues. And when we looked at the social issues, we saw that they were not involving the communities. And what we discussed with them and what we had to do is we had to stop the technical implementation for 1 full year and just concentrate on community mobilization, talking to the communities, forming them into groups, ensuring these communities, they had management committees that included both men and women, and ensuring that they were trained and equipped to actually maintain and operate the hand pumps, and also to give them health education as to why this water was important. And after that, this project, I managed to work there for 7 years. It was not an easy or slow process, but after a while, the projects were sustainable. And this story just demonstrates how important it is to look into the social issues. They may not be so expensive, they may not be so outstanding, but however much you pour in money without involving the people, then we end up with white elephants. So coming back to our work, as some of the participants have said, really when we look at the role of women, because we want to go beyond the community to the component of community of men and women, when we look at the women, why do we need to have women in development? And especially in the environment sector, we see that women have a primary role in managing the environment. In small-scale agriculture, for example, women produce up to 80% of small-scale agriculture in Africa. In Asia, it's up to 60%, and 30 to 40% in Latin America. As Gail has said, women are the ones who are collecting the firewood. They take care of the environment. They take care of the forests. They are the ones who are walking long distances to fetch water. And as such, through this role, there's some differentiated impacts, especially as we are experiencing the issue of climate change. Also, as they are doing this role, the women have accumulated knowledge and skills that they can give and contribute to when we are looking for solutions to the challenges that we are facing. As such, investing in women and girls is now considered a key breakthrough strategy for achieving the MDGs, and this has been shown to have significant effects on families and communities in development. Women's active engagement in project management has been linked to better project and program outcomes. Indeed, gender mainstreaming in programs and projects has been linked to improved efficiency and effectiveness of climate change programs and projects. I'd like to cite, usually there are people who like scientific evidence. I'd like to cite a recent background paper that was prepared by the 2010 by the World Development Report on Development and Climate Change by Harvard University's Robert Ford. The paper reported that social and political institutions play an important role in determining a country's ability to adapt to climate change, and the study recommends that climate change policymakers ought to focus on gender development to achieve success. So when we are looking at the issue of the ongoing crisis, the issues of climate change, if we are seeing that there is a differentiated impact on different people, depending on the role, be it men, be it women. For example, I like using very simple examples. When you look at when there's a drought or when there's a flood, women are in the front lines of the climate change impacts, especially in their role in agriculture. These have impacts on food security, the issue of water stress impacts on their workload, and also the distances they have to cover in their daily activities. As I was preparing this, I was remembering back in my country, there's a term that says the day for water is for water, or the day for firewood is for firewood. It means the day that you fetch water, you just fetch water. The day you decide it's collecting firewood, it's such a big task, that's the only task that you can really accomplish in that day. So what we are saying all in all is that women are active agents of change in development, and they have a right to equal representation and equal access to resources. A gender approach, when well implemented, and I like to say it's not only gender, but it's really social and gender approach, will have outcomes such as data and information on the development issues we are carrying out, for example, the issue of climate change, and this should include gender analysis, which should be done from the onset of the project initiation, for example, to assess the situation, the vulnerability and the needs that's there. There's need for data disaggregated by sex to ensure that in everything that we do, there's a report of, for example, how many men and how many women did we train? How many men, how many women did attend that training? But beyond the quantitative data, there's need for qualitative data to show the actual needs and the actual priorities that different genders have. And in addition to this, there is need for continued monitoring and evaluation throughout the implementation with gender indicators at all stages to review and track the progress in both the process of programming and planning and also in measuring the gendered impacts of the projects and programs that we effect or perform. Women's equal representation as stakeholders at all levels in decision-making processes at local, national, and global level is thus very important, and it will ensure that the needs and the priorities of the different gender are represented, as I've illustrated. Usually if you go for a community meeting and separate the men and the women and ask them what are their needs and what are their priorities, you will get very different answers. The men may want a road, the women may just simply want a school. So the needs and the priorities are usually different. And also, this also ensures that the specific knowledge and skills are utilized for sustainable development and the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. So we are saying having a gendered approach is really smart planning, it's smart development, because we are utilizing all the knowledge and skills that are available. To finalize, I'd like to highlight some of the activities that we are doing to support this work at UNDP. Most of our work in the gender team in the environment is done in collaboration with our partners in the Global Gender and Climate Alliance, and we've received substantive support from the governments of Finland and Denmark. And some of the work that we are doing to support this process, to support governments, and also to support the civil society organizations, is policy advice at the national and at global level. This is to ensure that we have an enabling policy environment that enhances equal socioeconomic opportunities for women, removes legal and administrative and financial constraints that affect women's economic advancement, and provide incentives and resources for equitable growth. So this is both to remove the hindrances and also to provide incentives at the policy level. In capacity development, we are also providing capacity development and technical support to support gender mainstreaming and integration of gender dimensions into climate change. At regional level, we are preparing cadres of experts on gender and climate change. Specifically, UNDP is covering the region of Africa and Asia. And our intention is to have experts in this new field that can support governments and other agencies to be able to really mainstream gender in their programming, in their planning, and even in their development of proposals. Another area that we are working on is in finance, specifically in climate finance. We know that finance is important, and despite all these awareness, without finance we cannot achieve the development. So we need to ensure that all existing and new, especially climate change finance, funds, and institutional structures, policies, and policies integrate and mainstream social and gender considerations. UNDP is doing a great length in this area, and we are also developing knowledge products in this field to support the governments and civil society organizations. In addition, we are also developing innovative projects and programs that target women's economic social development. I'd like to cite this Women's Green Business Initiative. It's a new innovative initiative that is looking into how we can turn the climate challenge into economic opportunities for women. Even as we are talking of the green economy, how do we ensure that we position women, that they have the information, that they have the access to the resources to be actively engaged in the new economy, in the green economy, and not only at the micro level, but even beyond to the small and medium enterprises. How can they be actively involved in this field? And this is a project. We have the flyer if you're interested, and we'll be piloting in 3 countries, in Kenya, in Malawi, and in Bangladesh. The final area that we are doing is in knowledge management. We are capturing and sharing lessons learned, and we are also sharing best practices and sharing the knowledge products. We have a few knowledge products. I'd like to cite the resource guide on gender and climate change. We are also developing guidebooks that can help the development practitioners and policy makers in mainstreaming gender in their work. And for example, we have this new publication on gender and community-based adaptation, which helps the community-based organizations to be able to mainstream gender in the implementation and in the planning of their projects. So to finalize, I just want to mention that a social and gender approach needs to be integrated in the entire programming process. Gender tools are not isolated entities. They are part of the process. They are flexible, and build on and strengthen existing knowledge structures and institutions. That means they will not require extra time. They just require us to be smarter for more efficient and effective development, and indeed sustainable development. It's an issue that is serious, that is at hand, and that we need to prioritize by actually showing tangible commitments, allocating adequate time, and even finances to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for helping us link from the local level up to policy and really bringing home that we need the data, and that it's not something that you have to do new. It's just smarter planning, which is very important. And in order to give us time for discussion, I want to move right on to our final speaker. We have Liz Thompson. She's the Assistant Secretary General at the UN, and she's Executive Coordinator of Rio 2012. From Barbados, she was a Minister of Environment for 12 years, and she was selected as the UNEP Champion of the Earth in 2008. And I believe she began her environmental work leading a delegation on work on the Kyoto Protocol. Thank you so much for your presence and sharing with us about Rio 2012.
Thank you very much, members of the panel, friends. I must confess that being in a Salvation Army Hall is particularly nostalgic for me, because when I was 7 years old, I joined the Salvation Army in Barbados, and it was in a room very much like this that we used to meet. So it is amazing how life is just full of circles where you seem to move from one point to the other and back again, and so many things seem to repeat themselves. I'm going to try to be very brief in my presentation so that we have time for questions, and hope that some of the points that I would want to make are going to come out during the question period. Of the 1.3 billion people across the earth who live on less than $1 a day, 70% of them are women. If that is not the most powerful case for a gender-based process of sustainable development, I do not know what is. There is no way that in making an investment in a company that you would alienate so much of your resource base and leave it to flounder. When I was a minister and a parliamentary representative, which I was an elected parliamentary representative for 14 years, people would come and engage with you in a very direct way, trying to get jobs. And I made at that time a very interesting observation, which has now been researched and supported by the World Bank. And it was that when women came and asked for jobs, that invariably those women held on to the jobs for years once you were able to help them to find an opportunity. And second, that when they got their money, it was spent in the home and the family and improving family circumstances. On the other hand, I found when I helped men to find jobs that invariably it was spent on social activity, liming, buying beers for the fellas, buying new clothes to make themselves look good, carrying out lots of different girlfriends. I'm serious, this was my experience. The money just did not filter down to the family in the same way. The World Bank is now saying financial aid, it gives all the statistics for women, and then it makes the point that financial aid put in the hands of men tends to lead to a higher share wasted on personal use. Women are essential to poverty reduction because of their role in assuring the welfare of households. Now that is independent research that gives support to what my observation was in a single Caribbean island. And what it also tells us is that the phenomenon that I experienced was not peculiar to my culture, that it is a global experience. In the road to Rio, therefore, it is critical for us to find a way as women and as citizens of the globe to include in the language and the agenda and the negotiating text that comes out of Rio a perspective on gender that includes protecting and ensuring the economic, social, and environmental empowerment of women. And I cast it in those terms because sustainable development does have three pillars: social, environmental, and economic. And we see and we heard from my sisters speaking today the environmental implications of including or not including women's issues in relation to sustainable development. We heard eloquently the financial implications of excluding women from the process of social development. And we know what all the other implications are. So it is not an accident, therefore, that one of the themes is green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication. And I make this point to emphasize that it really is not possible to deal with green economy, or the theme, the way the theme is framed. Green economy is not a means or end in itself. It is part of how we are intended to achieve sustainable development and poverty eradication across the globe. The Secretariat for Rio is of necessity responding to the wishes of member states. We have had to date a number of preparatory meetings, and there is next week a PrepCom upcoming. We've had an intercessional. We have disseminated questionnaires to major groups, to UN agencies, to countries, seeking their response to the issues so that we can start to frame a negotiating text. I just realized I'm speaking and not giving her enough time. Okay. Therefore, going forward, we are at the stage now where we are starting to get the draft text, the preliminary text which countries might negotiate ready. This is at the very early stages. It is critical, therefore, that those of us who have an interest in affecting the final outcome document and informing what feeds in to the negotiating process start from now to influence that process by speaking with UN Women, with UNDP, with respective government agencies. I think there are a number of issues which we can try to impact on. One, like I said, the language and the text and the final outcome, the development of post-Rio projects and programs, the development of sustainable development indicators which reflect gender issues. And Maria Esed Fernandez, who is sitting in the front row, made the point very eloquently yesterday in one of the panels at the UN that the measurement of GDP does not allow us to measure women's development or women's progress. And therefore it is critical, if we are to effectively understand what is happening to women, and by extension children, and by extension family, and by extension community, and by extension society, and by extension community, because the link is almost like dominoes falling from one to the next to the next. It is going to be critical for us to have globally accepted standards and measurements to determine women's progress, women's development, and to have means of measuring them when we speak about our economic, when we speak in economic terms at the wider level. It is going to be important too for us to determine whether or not it is critical to have a process of quotas to improve women's circumstances. And I must tell you that for a long time, I was opposed to quotas. I felt that we would get there on merit. But you know, the reality is that we don't get there on merit. It just doesn't happen in the real world. And again, I want to share with you, excuse me please, some statistics. And the conference is going to be held in June next year. The third RECCOM, just pausing to give you something of the roadmap. The third RECCOM is actually on the eve of the conference itself. Hence, if you are going to affect the outcome of the process, the timing for you is now. You cannot wait until January of next year or until March of next year, because the process is very much underway. After Beijing, after the MDGs, after all of the efforts that have been made to achieve gender parity, research done by Boston University now indicates that amongst Fortune 500 companies, women are only 3% of CEOs, 6% of top managers, 15% of board members, and there are more unemployed women than there are unemployed men, and that is with or without a financial crisis. And women earn an average of 17 to 18% less than men, even when they are doing exactly the same job. The question therefore arises, has not the time come for us to press for quotas? Do we not need stronger legislative frameworks at the national level, and should we not be pressing for these? And to what extent can we employ measures either through UN Women or otherwise to ensure that women are better educated, because a better educated woman raises a better family, makes better informed choices. Research has shown that women are more sensitive to environmental issues than are men. When you give them the technology, they are able to have a better quality of life. When you empower them economically, you have a society and an economy in which all citizens benefit, and this flow through of benefit tends to be more broad-based. Equally, at this time, I believe we need to consider, what do we want as women and as women's organizations to be our post-Rio legacy? And that is a critical issue. Are we going to be satisfied to come and discuss the same issues that we normally discuss? Or are we going to ask UN Women and all of the important agencies and get the Rio Secretariat to consider a policy platform and a set of programs and projects which will constitute a strong post-Rio legacy, so that we are able to transform women's lives across the globe, not with rhetoric, but with tangible projects on the ground that make a difference to the way they live every day. And that is where I'm going to pause.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring and just makes me realize how important it is that we're speaking with women like Narej and finding out what is happening there, making sure her voice comes up to UN Women or can be an input into what we're doing with the women's major group that Gale Energia and we do are involved in. So we're looking forward to your input. That's what is most important. We do want a good post-Rio legacy, I'm sure. So now I would like to open the floor to questions for the panelists, and we'll have the microphone for you to speak. If you could stand up and tell who you are before you ask your question. Are there any questions? We'll take these three questions, and then we'll come back to the panelists.
Just a quick question. I'm just wondering if the subject of green, our green economy, sort of as you raised the question, what is a green economy? What do we mean by it? Doesn't this get away from a lot of the key issues because so much time is spent on what is a green economy, and so we don't get to the substance of what needs to be discussed, whether it's women and women's position and leadership, and there should be more of us there, and secondly, climate change. Anybody who would like to address that? Perhaps Ms. Thompson, would you like to address that question?
Sure. We'll go ahead and we'll take the three questions and then come back to the panel.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, presenters. I'm called Winnie Fred Masiko. I'm from Uganda. I must say that I've been attracted to this session because of the topic, what it is on climate change. Just maybe to give a background as to why I'm here. I'm on the government delegation as a member of parliament, but I've chaired the Committee of Natural Resources in Parliament for several years, and I sat on that committee, and that's how I came to be involved and to know issues on climate change. Now I'm transiting, I'm leaving politics. I don't want to continue, I want to go to another field. So I think I can be useful in another area altogether. But what I've discovered is issues of climate change, especially in developing countries, are not known by the legislators themselves. They don't really haven't conceptualized whether there is climate change or not. So even when we're talking about involving women, involving grassroots women, if at the policy level, the policy makers are not conversant with this topic, we might not achieve much. So I imagine that the focus should be on issues on people that make the policy so that they understand and appreciate the issue as much as possible so that it percolates down. So I'd like to know, especially from UNDP, are there any, because I know it has a big presence in my country, are there any efforts that are in place to target the legislators, especially in my country who are going to get a new set soon? Is there any systematic arrangement that you focus on them and interest them in issues of climate change? And in many parts of Africa, there are women focuses in different parliaments. Has there been any effort to focus on them so that we can achieve something more tangible on the grassroots women and other sectors in government? Thank you.
We'll take the person in the middle in the back and then come back to the panel.
Lynn Adamson, I'm here from Toronto, Canada. What I'm missing in the presentations is a sense of the urgency having to do with the galloping pace of climate, what I would call climate chaos, that's happening all around us. And I just wonder if, I don't get a sense of how these initiatives you're talking about are actually going to make that big shift that I think women, are in a good position to call for. But I just really am concerned about the absolute urgency and the crisis, which it's continually being underestimated, but even in the underestimates, it's going to overwhelm our societies, and the most vulnerable people are not the ones causing this. And how can we get a more urgent sense of a message out there? Thanks.
get a sense of how many more questions, because we're closing in. Okay, so we'll take these three and try to do it quickly, and then we'll come and get as many of the rest as we can.
Just very quickly, does the definition or lack of it cause us to take attention away from the real issues? Don't know. And that's being perfectly honest. I think that when we first started as a global community talking about globalization, we had to come to the point where we agreed on a definition. We are going through that same angst now in relation to green economy. I think that a green economy is one that promotes growth while preserving and protecting the natural resource base and supporting the human and social capital. That's really a very basic definition and includes projects such as, and you can add to that any number of projects that have to do with energy, water, waste, low carbon initiatives, etc. But that's only the list of and definition. I mean, we really are trying at the level of the Secretariat in finding a definition on which countries can agree. UNEP in their report on green economy, which came out last week, they have another definition, and there are going to be myriad definitions until we settle. The point is that at this stage, while the struggle for turf and space and the language is ongoing, we need to put in a gender-sensitive perspective into the definition. And that is really all I can tell you, that at this stage, there are a lot of discussions about what green economy is, what are the implications for trade, what does it mean for developing countries, what does it mean for women. And the situation is fluid. At the moment, a lot of the answers are very much up in the air, and until they come down, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen.
Can I just add one thing on that? And this is certainly a topic that we've been struggling with about, just green economies as a distraction. And one thing that I've seen this in America, and that's not necessarily speaking as an Energia representative, is that in the post-economic crisis time, that the idea of a green economy has more resonance in terms of people thinking about green jobs. And I think that it is viewed as a broader concept, that sustainable development, the United States never accepted that as something that had anything to do with us. Although, in fact, I've been very encouraged, at least in certain areas, like in New York City, we have a sustainability plan, and there's been a lot that's happened in terms of sustainability. But I think the idea of a green economy is that it's not just about developing countries, it's not just about the poor people, it's that all of us have to be involved in making that transition. And in terms of the urgency of the climate change issues, I think it's just overwhelming to be bombarded with the kind of information that I receive daily on my listservs, and you just have to try to find some constructive way to deal with it. I can't, I've been talking about climate change for 20 years, and it's extremely frustrating, particularly in my own country, to see what, the policies or lack of policies over this period of time. But, you have to build a constituency for it, and we haven't been able to do that in this country, and it's really disturbing. But it means everybody has to get involved, and, I don't know what the right way to do that is. It's a frustrating situation, but you have to just say, well, I'm going to work on what I can and see what I can do.
I had printed out a definition for the green economy, which I'd like to share. It says that it's an economy that results in improved human well-being and reduced inequalities, which are not exposing future generations to significant environmental risks and ecological scarcities. All in all, what my really point is that when we listen to that definition, it's the same thing as sustainable development. So what I'd like to say personally from my experience is that the development actors always have some buzzwords that they use. But all in all, when you look at the base of it, it's really about development. And what we are talking about is that we need to have, to ensure that we have women on the table when we plan for development, that we include them in decision making, and that we ensure they have equal access and control to the resources, both social and economic resources. So I think we need to be careful as women, women organizations, as we are raising awareness on gender issues, that we do not miss out on the opportunities. Whatever term is used, the definition and the base information is the same. We just need to ensure that we are looking at this issue holistically as a development issues. To answer the question from Uganda, thank you for that question. I mentioned that we are doing a lot of awareness, mainly, for me, I'll speak on gender and climate change. We have developed a training manual on the gender dimensions of climate change, because these have not even been obvious to even people working on environment, and this we've done in conjunction with the DGCA. And in Africa, we have been having regional training targeting the policymakers, especially within the Ministry of Environment, the experts that come to negotiate around the UNFCCC negotiations on climate change. And we had a training in 2009 in Addis Ababa, which we had all representatives from the governments from Africa region. We had a training together with UNEP, and we were able to train not only the government negotiators, but also we had a training of trainers, where we equipped trained experts in the region on the gender dimensions of climate change. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we have a follow-up on this, where now we are targeting a smaller group of experts that we are going to have an in-depth training session and capacity building of these experts, so that they can be able to support governments and even the civil society organizations in this area, especially of climate change. What I also feel that although we are targeting the environment people, we need to target the parliamentarians. I know we've been trying to send some of our experts in the region to train around the parliamentarian meetings, but I feel we can still do more of this and be more targeted to achieve, to ensure that the parliamentarians have this information, because they're the ones who ultimately make the decisions at the national level. And also, I believe they also need not just the gender dimensions, but also the basic knowledge of climate change. And we have the capacity within UNDP Environment and Energy Group, and we can follow up on this.
Thank you. I know I saw many, many hands, and let's see if you have a very brief question that will be helpful, and we'll take as many as we can until our panelists need to go. So we'll start at that side where we haven't had anyone.
I'm Sabina Nochi-Mensah from Ghana. I'm the Gender and Development Coordinator at the Gratis Foundation and the National Focal Person for Energia in Ghana. From my association with Energia and the training of trainers I received in Addis Ababa from the GGCA team, I started something in Ghana. What we did through the network was to mainstream gender concerns into some of the ministries. So we targeted first the Ministry of Energy, where with the support of Energia, we did a gender audit of the ministry. What I realized was that most of the management staff did not have the basic information on gender. So we started from there, and it has worked. Sometimes the approach we use must also be taken into consideration. And then from there we moved to a purely research center, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And through there we started with the management, that's at the top. And when the top understood our mission, then we moved to the middle level, then to the lower level. And it's working perfectly. So I'm just making a suggestion that if such a targeted approach is used, we are able to get the men especially to understand gender. And when they do understand, it helps move the women also forward. So let's look at it from a multi-sectoral approach, and I'm sure we'll get to where we want to get. And then aside that, when it comes to the project level, we've managed to train rural women, some of them completely illiterate. But if you are able to give them the tools and take your time to explain, even in their language, if they don't understand it, gradually they are brought on board. And once we are doing that, we shouldn't forget the husbands and then the male counterparts of the society. Because if they understand our aim and objective, they help us push the women forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come here to the middle and move across. Okay, sure, we can try.
Thank you. My name is Violet Shibutse. I'm a grassroots woman leader from Kenya, from an organization called Roots Kenya, working with Wild Commission and Roots International. I think the challenge we have in climate change is that a lot of emphasis has been on the response to the effects of climate change. There is minimal efforts on resilience, how communities can be resilient to climate change. That has not been happening. The other thing is resources to support the work of grassroots women initiatives that respond to environmental conservation and enabling resilient communities do not seem to be available. And wherever they are available, I think the language that the women are supposed to express when they are writing proposals or they are seeking this fund is still very technical. Especially we know that in environment or generally in climate, there is very technical language that the grassroots women cannot write. In trainings, I've had a very good example, and I think let's go by her example. Let us try to interpret the training materials that we have so that they are able to be in a language that can be well understood by the grassroots women. And before we develop these trainings, let us also look at what grassroots women are doing and see how best we can fit some of the examples, the experiences into these trainings. Because some of these trainings look like they just come from nowhere. But we have trainings that can best be used if they copy what is exactly happening on the ground. Very good examples that can be used. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a gentleman in the middle and then a woman on the end here. Oh, he left, so we'll take this last question. And then third row. Because I think they will cut off the microphones in about a minute.
Very fast. I'm Daphne Rojas from the Asian Women's Network on Gender and Development and the Lenas de Limitas Global Forum. I'm here with a big delegation of local officials from the Philippines. We could hardly open our eyes because we're suffering from jet lag, but we thought the forum is very exciting and we can bring back a lot to the country in the Asia-Pacific region and what we have learned from this forum. So congratulations to the panel. But what we would like to bring to the preparation for Rio is more upscaling of women's empowerment to connect the grassroots, the community level to national and to global. And all these women should be empowered and have a sense of urgency in all these initiatives. They are local officials, there are gender focal points also using men and women as well. But even mobilization, if you do not focus and give more attention to giving more resources to women, usually the men, as a matter of course, came up. So we want upscaling. For instance, in climate change, in the Asia-Pacific region, it's easy to explain climate change because we suffer it every day. If not very hot, very cold, floods or aridity or desertification. So it's easy and mobilization. But let's talk of resources. Let's talk of decision making. Women are not there. Resources, you think of millions. No, but what do women receive? Pittance. So there must be upscaling of resources. We do not want microcredit. Do you want access to banks? Or let's establish banks, more capital for women. Thank you.
Many great suggestions from the audience, thank you. I'm not sure if the panel has a few quick responses. Oh, the man, he did not leave, okay. And then we'll take a very quick question and
Thank
final
you.
word.
Thank you. I just want to make one comment. I think, and maybe for you it's very obvious, but I think for the audience it's important to see that we have to also look at the girl child and the connection to education and how that can have a transformative impact on what we're talking about. And I think when you say woman, not everyone would assume that you're also talking about the girl child, and I think it's important that it's highlighted and clearly stated in any document that you may end up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final responses from the panel? Yes, there is.
Bom, eu vou responder atrasada. Como que eu penso 2 dias depois? Eu só queria responder a primeira pergunta, que é a mudanças climáticas. Quem entende mais somos nós que somos primeiros atingidos. Não somos os legisladores, porque eles não entendem porque não são atingidos, porque não percebem. A segunda, energia verde é complicada para entender que não é uma cidade. Agora, para nós que somos produtores de alimentos, nós entendemos o que é energia verde. Porque produzir alimento é começar a organizar a nossa produção a partir do que nós temos. Aí só nós, agricultores, que temos um linguajar mais fácil.
She's saying that I'm gonna answer a little late because it takes me 2 days to think. The understanding of climate changes, it's a thing just for the people who suffer it. Like the legislators would not know any better because they don't suffer the climate changes. That's what she was trying to prove with the point of bureaucracy and hunger. They don't understand that the bureaucracy is keeping their people hungry. And the other problem, the other question, that green energy, it's a very difficult term to understand. And another thing that it's understood just by the people that suffer them all the time. Like people from the city sometimes cannot understand the term, but they see that every day. It's easy for them to understand.
E que nós sofremos com os legisladores, nós produtores de alimento, porque quando nós produzimos alimento, dizem que o nosso alimento é clandestino. E aí nós temos que exportar para fora para industrializar, para dizer que ele é legal. E aí nós começamos a complicar, né? É uma coisa que a gente não consegue falar de português, mas a gente vai perguntar um dia se comunicar melhor para dizer aonde está o erro. E os legisladores disseram que o que vocês estão produzindo, a meu papel é o grau que está legal, e não o que vocês produzem que é legal, né? Porque produzir é fácil. O difícil é entender essa produção para alimentar a gente.
Obrigada. That has to be our very last point. If you could make it quickly, and then we need to make room for the next panel and move on out. But I'm sure we may be able to entertain questions offline here.
That as food producers, she has this problem with the legislators that sometimes they consider their food not suitable for the market, that they are clandestine merchandise. That means they have to export. They have to industrialize and export this food that could be used at the local level.
Okay. Thank you so